the perspective of young people, when they see in their homes how intimacy is being deprived, right? You find even sometimes parents, they're happy to give their kids money, they're happy to, they put them in the best schools, but just leave me in my bubble. Leave me just in my own little circle, and I don't want anyone to... That's a very, very bad thing to pass on, because we're even depriving maybe our children of intimacy. We're depriving our best friends of intimacy. And this is really, really important. So we'll get into that. We said the reason of it is fear of connection. Fear of connection. Chances are maybe somebody has been traumatized in their past. Something has caused some type of trauma in their mind. And when you think of trauma, you automatically think the worst thing, right? Sexual abuse or something like that. That's not trauma. Trauma is just witnessing somebody maybe get their life destroyed because of a distortion maybe of sexuality. And so we'll get into that. All right, so what we want to talk about is effective communication that creates intimacy. I don't want us to think of sexual intimacy as only a transaction, right? And I think in marriage, sometimes it just becomes eventually a transaction. So if anybody is younger than the age of whatever, you want to make sure that your kids are either not here or they go to their Sunday school, but you want to make sure that this talk is age appropriate for your kids if they're here. All right. In communication, we really how we build intimacy with one another, right? I can talk about Super Bowl, and we talk about how the game was last week, and how's the weather in wherever, and everything stays on the outside. But we said intimacy is into me, into me, looking inside of me and seeing something deeper than the superficial things. So we're going to talk about effective communication. So how do intimate relationships develop? Since intimacy involves connection between the deepest parts of each partner or each person in the relationship, you can only experience intimacy in marriage if we know and are known by one another. You say, oh yeah, of course, I know her, or I know my husband, or I know my wife, or I know my best friend. You'd be surprised some things that you don't know. You'd be surprised that people can be in relationships for 20 years. And there's something inside of them that has taken place, that they build a big wall around their heart. They don't let anybody in this area, in this category of my life, because of something that has gone deeply wrong in my life. So how does this knowing and being known happen? It happens by choosing to reveal yourself. Choosing to reveal yourself. When we talk about how this works with God, by actively searching for our revelations. I'm going to explain what all this means. What does that mean? In all of our conversations with each other, we give little revelations. We try to give hints to the people in our lives to see something deeper in me. You say, oh, no, I don't like big social gatherings. I just don't want to be around people right now. That's okay. Some people are introverted. But introverted is not antisocial. There's a big difference between an introvert who gets their energy from being by themselves, maybe spending time alone, versus being antisocial. I don't want to deal with people at all. That is a small warning sign or red flashing light that says there is an issue. There is some type of wall that is guarded that the person may be revealing or may not. How many of you can discover from your friends some of the, I don't want you to look at them as warning signs, but I want you to look at them as small revelations. Maybe as young people, they're starting, hey, that girl, she seems single, why don't you go talk to her? And you find all of a sudden, no, I'm not going to talk to her. You say, but you're like, this is the age, you need to get to know somebody. You say, I just don't want to, fear of rejection. Maybe there's fear of rejection. It's not that they don't know how to talk to the young lady and get to know her and ask her out on a date. That's not what it is. There's some deep fear in there that makes the person deprive themselves of intimacy, of connecting with somebody else. All right. Also, your attitudes towards communication and the different patterns of your conversations are modeled after the people whom you grew up with. So, how many of you can remember how your parents interacted with each other at home? You know, maybe it's you come home, dad is in the office, mom is in the kitchen, they make sure that everybody knows who's going to pick up the kids, and that was the deepest of connection that we saw. Maybe every once in a while they would yell at somebody, and that was like the closest they ever got because they were passionately like connecting through an argument. And like, but I never saw them like sitting next on the couch, holding hands, saying I love you, like doing spontaneous romantic things. So some people only understand love to be just like we take care of business. You get the bills, I got the kids, we're good. And you're modeling it in your home. And your kids are, whether you think it or not, you are mirroring to them. Be careful. You say, no, my kids know. Your kids know one of two things. They know what goes on in your house, and they know what goes on TV. That's their education. What they see on TV, in the romantic movies, what nowadays are not romantic, they're just like... And what happens between mom and dad. And this is their education in regards how a husband and wife should conduct themselves at levels of intimacy. All right? So, first thing is, we can only know God to the degree that God initiates through self-disclosure. I'll explain what this means. We can only know God to the degree that God initiates through self-disclosure. Meaning, you can only know God up to the point that He's decided to reveal Himself. And so we know that when God revealed Himself, He did an amazing job, right? He didn't just give us some information, some Bible verses, some stories. No. He came down and He took flesh and He lived among us. And we saw Him interact, and we saw Him deal with sinners. We saw Him deal with Pharisees, and we saw Him deal with children. We saw Him deal with emperors. And we saw Jesus deal. We saw God reveal Himself to us so that God would be known. There's a verse in Job chapter 11 that says this. It says, can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? The answer is no. You can only find out whatever God is willing to reveal. You can only find out what God is willing to reveal. And we know that God is willing to continue to grant us insight to know Him more and more and more. It's so important that I explain this because you have to know that if you can't know God, like if God Himself was kind of like, okay, I'm going to let you just see this little part of me, but I don't need you to know too much more about me. But because God has put Himself out open for us to know us deeply, this is a question I want to ask you yourself right now. Do you know God deeply? You say, what does that mean? Do I pray? Sure. No. Like pray is like I talk to God. I talk to my post office guy. I talk to the I talk to the guy in the department store in Macy's. Like that doesn't mean that you have intimacy with God. God, and this is why in the church we try to teach theology, right? Because God is so big. You say, I don't need to know those big things about God. Okay, you want to know this much of God? Sure. But God has tried to communicate His love in so many ways because He wants you to be deeply close to Him. I also want you to think about how you are with God. Dear Lord, be with the kids and help mom and help dad and help me at work and whatever. And I often tell people, when you pray, that stuff is not, you need to be naked before God. The Bible talks about in Song of Songs, it says, the king draws me into his chambers, in his special room. The book of Song of Songs is about a king King Solomon, and a Shulamite woman, or this peasant woman. And the king took this peasant woman into his palace and into his king's chambers. Who can go into the room of the king? Who can go into the bedroom of the king? No one. But this woman was invited into the chambers of the king to be deeply intimate with God. Are you being so shallow with God? Believe it or not, if you are doing it with God, you are for sure doing it with the people in your life. You don't want to open up what's going on inside of me. Lord, I am deathly afraid of friendships. Lord, I'm afraid that somebody's going to come inside my heart and not love me. I'm going to let somebody in, and then they're going to reject me. You see, when we become real with God and we unclose and unrobe, like as soon as when two people, they enter into this marriage room or this marriage chamber, they unrobe and they say, this is everything about me. And they disclose everything about themselves. And they enter into intimacy. So first, before we continue about how we deal with one another, how are you with God? How shallow are you with God? Lord, help the economy, help my work, help my kids, help my... And Jesus is standing there. Okay, anything else, ma'am? Anything else I can do for you? Can I go and deliver this to the cook in the back? Like, that's how we deal with God. God is my waiter. So I'll have one of these, and I'll have one of these, and I'll have one of these. Okay, anything else? Would you like some, sugar with your coffee? Like, that's how we deal with God. That's not intimacy, and that's not a love relationship. God has disclosed Himself, has revealed Himself to you, and as much as you seek is as much as He's going to give. Like, you're never going to get to a point where it says, you stop right there. You don't go any further with me. Like, you stay there, and I'll stay here. No. God calls us His bride. He calls the church His bride. And the bride has the only access to the king that no one else gets. Right? When you are the bride, she gets access to the groom that nobody else gets. That's us with God. But be careful. Like I said, if you are like that with God, with this big wall, chances are you're like that with other people in your life. All right. Like I said, the same thing happens in our relationships. So in marriage, or in relationships in general. So again, young people who are not married, don't take it as, okay, this is about marriage. No. I want you to soak in everything I'm saying. You are the most important people to know this, more than anybody else, because we want to stop the cycle of what's happening in today's